Hi, and welcome to Noble Character Crafts. My name is Amy, and today I am going to be showing you how I made this headband. It is a combination of both crochet and knitting, and I will go through step by step from beginning to end how I constructed this headband. In the description box below, you will find a list of all the supplies that you will need in order to complete this project, as well as a written out description of all of the instructions for this project. So I hope that you enjoy this tutorial and that it is clear for you. Please feel free to leave me any comments down below with any questions that you might have, or you can get in contact with me through my email at noblecharactercrafts@yahoo.com. Here I have a basket of a few scraps. The total amount of grams that I needed to make this first headband was 53 grams. I used a mostly worsted weight, but I do have some bulky weight that I put into this headband, and I don't see much of a difference when I use bulky weight versus worsted weight, so I don't have a problem combining them in this project. The scraps that I've pulled today are, again, mainly worsted weight. They're all worsted weight except for this one little bit of scrap, which I actually used in the first headband around some of these granny squares. So I'm going to continue to use the rest of this bulky weight yarn in this second headband as well. So I've grabbed, I think the total I've grabbed here is about 56 grams of yarn, so that should be plenty to make another headband. I'm using an H5mm clover crochet hook, and then you'll just need a pair of scissors, of course. The way that this headband is constructed is you start off with 10 granny squares, and those granny squares are made up of 2 rounds each, and I change color for each of those rounds, as you can see here. Then I join as I go along to join all of these granny squares together into a loop. Once the 10 granny squares are joined in a loop, then I will show you how I pick up stitches and start knitting the ribbing on either side of the headband. But we will start off by making 10 simple granny squares. I'm going to start off with this small scrap of pink yarn to make the first round of my first granny square. I'm going to start off with a slip knot, and I'm going to chain 4. I'll do a slip stitch into the first chain to join this into a loop. Now I'm going to chain 3, and that's going to act as my first double crochet stitch. I like to give this the beginning end piece here that I started with, a bit of a tug to tighten up my circle in the center here. And I'm going to crochet over that tail so I don't have to weave it in the end. So I'm now going to be doing 2 more double crochets into the center of this loop that I made, going right over this tail as I work those. And then I chain 2 for the corner. So this is our first cluster. The granny squares are made up of sets of clusters that are made up of 3 double crochet stitches in each cluster. The first round has 4 of those clusters, so I'm going to go around and add 3 more of these clusters of 3 double crochets, continuing to work right over that tail the whole way around. And again, chain 2 for each corner. Okay, now I have gone around the first round here. So I have the 4 sets of 3 double crochet stitches, and I have a chain 2 for each corner. I've just now ended with another chain 2 for my last corner, and I'm going to do a slip stitch into the top of the first chain 3 right here. So this is 1, 2, 3 from the first chain 3. And I'm going to do a slip stitch, making sure that I have 2 loops over the top of my hook and pull through to close off that first round. And I can go ahead and cut the end of my yarn now. That's the end of the first round. I have this tail from the beginning of my work. I give that a nice firm pull just to tighten up the center of my granny square. And then I'm going to use my hook to kind of weave it in through these stitches here. And bring it up to the top of this row so that I can crochet over it on the second round and continue hiding that tail. And I'll also be crocheting over this end tail as I work the second round as well. So I'm going to change colors for the second round. I start in one of the corners. I usually like to start right before these tails just to make sure I crochet over them the whole way and they're nice and secure. So I put my hook into one of those corner spaces and grab my new color of yarn. And I do the first chain stitch going over the tail and you see how I'm holding the tail together with the working yarn. And I do the first chain with both of those held together just to give that tail a nice secure hold. And then I do another 2 chains, so a total of 3 chains for that first stitch. And then I'm going to do 2 more double crochets in this same corner space. I'm going to chain 2 for the new corner. And again, in this same corner space, I'm going to do 3 double crochet stitches to make another cluster. And again, I'm working over all those tails. All right, the only thing now about granny squares is that you're going to be skipping over a space here. The next stitch you're going to be working into is the next corner, and I want to work over these tails. So I'm going to weave them in through the stitches to get across this first cluster. Of course, you don't have to do it in this way. You can just weave them in with a tapestry needle at the end if you find that that is easier. This is just my preferred method. I prefer just to do it in this way. I admit that granny squares aren't the easiest because you have to kind of work over these clusters in this way. But I still find that it is easier just to try to work over them as I go so I don't have to worry about them in the end. So I've just kind of weaved them in or woven them in to get across to this next corner space. I'm gonna forget about that gray piece for right now. I'm just working over the pink because I don't want the gray to be into that pink round at all. So I am doing another cluster of 3 double crochets in this next corner. Chain 2 for the next corner stitch, and again 3 double crochets in the next, or in the same space from the previous round. And you'll just repeat that for each of the corners. 2 sets of 3 double crochet stitches together with a chain 2 in each corner space. Now this little tail is probably not long enough to stretch all the way over here to get caught in that next corner, so I will just be clipping that off when I'm done with this round. And I think it is secure enough at this point. It has been worked over enough to secure it. I have worked around this second round now, so I have 2 sets of 3 double crochet clusters and a chain 2 in each corner space. Again, I'm going to do a slip stitch into the top of the first chain 3 to join. And you can cut your yarn again. Again, I'm going to weave in this tail right here up to the next row so that I can work over it as I join the next granny square to this one. So there is the first one done, the first granny square done, and I'm just going to measure it really quickly to give you an idea of my gauge. Mine measures about 2.5 inches across. I am going to continue making a total of 5 granny squares. So go ahead and make up 5 granny squares just like this manner, and then I will meet you back here so that we can start making more and joining them as we go. I have now worked up 5 of the granny squares completely, so they all have 2 rounds each. And then I also went ahead and worked up 5 single round granny squares. So these will be for the other 5 that we'll need for a total of 10. So go ahead and make up 5 of the single round granny squares as well. And go ahead and pause this video and come back if you need time to make up those extra 5 single squares. So now I am to the point where I am going to start joining these granny squares together to form a loop to make the headband. I'm going to start the second round of this granny square as I did before by chaining 3. I like to start off with just 1 cluster of 3 double crochets in that first corner, and then I'm going to move on to the second corner. I'm only going to make 1 cluster of 3. I'm going to chain only 1, and then I'm going to pick up one of the complete squares that I've already made, and I'm going to join this new square to this completed square. I'm going to insert my hook from the top down into one of these corner stitches of this previous square. Actually, I want to do it on this side so that I can work over this tail while I'm joining them. If I didn't do it on that side, then I would have this tail on the edge where I'm going to be picking up stitches to start knitting the ribbing, which is also okay. You can work over them in that way too, but I'd rather just crochet over them. Anyway, you just pull up a loop to join them, and then that loop that you've pulled up to join these 2 squares acts as the second chain for your corner. And then you just work 3 more double crochets to form the second cluster in this corner. Then you're going to do the same thing into this space between these clusters. You're going to put your hook from the top down into that space and pull up a loop to join them. And then the next thing that you will do is start working into this next corner, which will be the third corner you're working, but I'm going to weave in these little tails that I have hanging out on both of my squares so I can work over them. Okay, now I'm going to just work into that next corner, making another set of 3 double crochets. And this time I'm going to use my first chain for this corner as my connecting stitch. So again, from the top down, insert into that next corner space and pull up a loop. And then I will chain 1, and that's the second chain of that corner stitch. And then I'll continue working around as before. Okay, now I am to the next corner. I've worked one cluster of 3 double crochets. I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to pick up another square and again insert into that corner, pull up a loop to connect those 2 together, and work a second cluster in that same corner. And same as we did before, into this middle space, pull up a loop, and now we're going to work the final cluster in that final corner over here. Oh, I need to weave in this little tail here. Okay, and on that first chain, you're going to use that as your connecting stitch from the top down. Pull up a loop, and then you're just going to chain 1 more to finish off that corner, and you will do a slip stitch again into the top of that chain 3, that first chain 3 from that round. And you can cut off your yarn. And now we have our first 3 granny squares connected together. I have all these little tails that I have secured so I can, well, I think I'll weave that one up to the next row, but this one here, I can cut this off. This is secured in really well. And this little guy that's hanging out can get cut off. You can go ahead and repeat this process. So the next one that I will do, I will be doing it in the same way. I will just be joining to this one and then adding in a new one. And I'll be making a long line. And I will meet you back here when you have when it's time to add in your very last square to join this all into a loop. So you'll continue repeating the process that we just did to form one long line that will have 9 granny squares in it. I do just want to mention that if you are new to making granny squares, you do want to pay attention to which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side. You'll notice that on the right side, I think, well, the stitches just look a bit prettier, and also the edging usually tends to curl up a little bit. I mean, they do lay flat, but if you look at the back side, you can see that they're kind of curling down. So that's how you can at least tell the front from the back. And of course, you always want to be working with the front sides up so that you can see the prettiest side. So just be careful of that if this is new to you, especially maybe if you've made a bunch of these little ones. They can be a little tricky to tell which side is the right and which side is the wrong side. But again, that edging stitch has a bit of a ridge on it, I think, that you can really see that's the right side. And the wrong side, the edge doesn't have that ridge, and it kind of folds down, I think. But it's not a huge deal if you happen to put one in upside down. It's not the end of the world. It's not that noticeable. So I have now joined 9 of my squares into one single line. As you can see, the color placement for this one, I was able to do every other one as a matching square. In my original headband that I made, it's a bit more scrappy because I just had more colors and little bits of different colors that I put into it. So of course you can arrange your squares however you would like to. Whatever scraps you have that you're working with, there's many options of how you can arrange your colors. In the original one here, you can also see that I even used scraps when I worked the bands, the knitted ribbing, and I just used up all that I had left over of these bits of yarn. And so even both ends of this headband are obviously not matching, but that's the fun of a scrappy project. This new headband that I'm making is going to be a little bit more consistent with the color placement. I am going to use this final, it's quite a larger scrap of this light pink yarn that I'm hoping will be enough to do both of the bands, so they won't be, this one won't be quite as scrappy looking as the first one. So now I have all 9 squares joined together in one single line, and I just need to make one more square using these little bits. Hopefully this is enough. I'm sure it will be to do the last square. As I'm joining this square in, I'm going to be joining this long line of squares into a loop. So I will start off this square as I did before with the first corner cluster. And I'll work into the next corner, one set of clusters, or one cluster. In the next corner, chain 1, and then I'm just going to pick one end of this long line, and I'm going to do that connecting stitch with the second chain. I'll use that second chain for the corner to connect again, and then work the second cluster of 3 double crochets in that same corner. So this is just like we've done already. The same method we've already done, we're going to continue with. The wild turkeys outside are being very noisy. I don't know if the microphone will pick them up, but they're gobbling outside my window. We have wild turkeys that live on our property. Anyway, so we're just going to work into this next corner with another joining stitch, chain 1. So that's just like we've already done. There's no change there. The next corner will be where we will start to join into a loop. So you'll work the first cluster of 3 double crochets, chain 1, and then we're going to just wrap this around so that it makes a loop. And you're just going to join into that corner with your slip stitch and continue around like we did before. And working into that final corner, chain 1, and do a slip stitch into the top of the first chain 3 like we did before as well. And you can cut off your yarn. And now we have the beginning of our headband. Now you can really get a good, try it on at this point and see if you have a good fit. Hopefully you do. If it is too big or too small, you can try to take a square out or add a square in and see if that will be a better fit. But for my head circumference and my gauge for what I'm getting with this weight of yarn and hook and everything, 10 squares works well for my head. It is a bit of a loose fit at this point when I try it on my head, but that's okay because the ribbing is going to cinch it up at both ends. So if it's a bit big for your head, that's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be a very tight fit at this point. I'm going to go ahead and weave in all of these ends just using my hook as I've done before. I'm just going to weave in all of these ends to kind of give them a bit of a secure spot to sit. So I'm just going to weave these all in along the edges, and I'll meet you back here when I'm all done with that. Okay, I have woven in all of those ends as best I could. I still have quite a few little tiny tails that are sticking out, but I might work over those as I pick up the stitches for the knitted on ribbing. And if not, I'll just cut them off in the end. So now it is time to pick up the stitches and start knitting on the ribbing. I like to use a crochet hook that is just solid metal like this to pick up stitches. And I use that whenever I pick up stitches for a project. I just find it is easiest. This one I'm using is a G hook, which is a 4.25 millimeter hook. And then I'm also going to be using a short cable. This one is, I think it makes a 16-inch loop with my 4-inch needles on it here. Let me double check. Yes, this is a 16-inch circular, and I have a 6 4mm set of needles on here. On each granny square, I am going to pick up 8 stitches total. So 8 times 10, I will have a total of 80 stitches when I am all done. So the way that I do that, each one of these granny clusters, it's easy to pick up 1 stitch for each of those. So that is 6 stitches. And then I'm going to pick up 1 stitch in each of these corner chain stitches for a total of 8 per square. So I just insert my hook. I'm going to grab my yarn that I will be using for the ribbing and pull up a loop. And I will just continue along, picking up a stitch for each of those 3 cluster stitches. And again. And now I have a total of 8 stitches on my crochet hook, and I'm just going to slide those over to my needle now. They're all twisted on the hook, so I'm just going to pick them up from that back leg of the stitch to twist them so that they're going the right way on my needle. And I'll work into the next square. Again, I have 8 stitches for the next square. I'll slide those over to the needle as well. And I will just continue all the way around until I have picked up all 80 stitches. Okay, I have now picked up all 80 stitches along the edge here and put them on the needles. I'm going to put in a stitch marker to mark the beginning of my round. And I'm just going to do a 1x1 ribbing for 2 inches to copy the first headband that I made. So I will just work around and around until I have worked up 2 inches of 1x1 ribbing. Then you'll want to do a bind off with whatever kind of a loose bind off you prefer. You know, you want it to be a stretchy bind off since it will be a ribbing going around your head. I prefer to do a 1x1 tubular bind off using a sewn method, and I will link to the Very Pink Knits tutorial that I learned how to do that bind off in the description box below if you're interested in that type of a bind off. But you just need to work the ribbing for both sides. You'll obviously just both sides are going to be exactly the same. So you will pick up stitches in the exact same manner for the other edge work the 1x1 ribbing for 2 inches and bind off on that end as well, and then your headband is done. So here is the completed headband. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It looks a little bit smaller actually than the first one that I made, but it still fits the same. So again, I did use a little bit more bulky weight yarn in this one, plus I used a lot of Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight in this one as well, which is a little bit thicker than the worsted weight that I used, especially for the ribbing on this one. So it just, I guess, turned out a little bit more cinched in, I guess, around the ribbing, but still it fits the same. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. So there you can kind of see how it looks on. So I hope that you all enjoyed this tutorial. Please feel free to leave me any comments or questions that you might have in the comments down below. I'd be glad to help you out as much as possible if you do have any questions concerning this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.